So before I start, I would just like to introduce you kind of briefly.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Farquharson is a tenured senior lecturer in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy, and as we heard, Deputy Dean for Graduate Studies and Research for the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona. He was formerly a visiting researcher and adjunct lecturer in the English department of the Aalborg Ludwig Universiteit Freiburg, that we also heard about. He was previously a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Inter-American Studies at the University of Bielefeld. Since August 2013, he has been an honorary research fellow in the Department of Modern Languages and Linguistics at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, where previously served as lecturer in linguistics from 2010 to 2013. He has also lectured at the University of Technology, Jamaica from 2008 to 2010. From 2005 to 2008, he held a doctoral fellowship at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. In 2008, he was the recipient of the Rex Nettleford Fellowship in Cultural Studies. He's a founder and coordinator of the Jamaican Lexicography Project, JAMLEX, and chief editor of the Jamaican National Dictionary. Dr. Farquharson's research interests include descriptive linguistics of Caribbean languages, lexicography, morphology, anthropological linguistics, and cultural studies. He has worked, among others, on slang and swear words in Jamaican Creole, Creole morphology, and reconstruction. His talk today is titled Reconstructing Akande Names Supporting Evidence from the Caribbean. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Farquharson.
Sorry about that. Am I up?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
All right, so welcome everybody, and sorry that I didn't get to go through everybody. I would have loved to do the introductions. I didn't know that Utah was this diverse, and so I was getting to know a few of the other people. I think we went through probably about half of those present. Hi, Ben. How are you? It has been ages.
I'm good. Hi, Joseph.
All right. Okay, so I haven't done this since 2007. And when I did this, I don't mean a presentation, what I'm about to do now. And when I did it in 2007 at a conference, at the beginning of my presentation, at a conference, I got a figurative slap on the wrist from my supervisor, who said to me, never you start a presentation with an apology, which was other way to say, you know, ensure that you are prepared. So Joseph was prepared, probably more prepared than he ever was in his entire life. How I normally work is that I will start early, but I never end early. I start my preparations early. I know what I have to say, etc. But then it's much closer to the event that I will pull everything together, organize my PowerPoint presentation. I said to myself, no, can't do it this time around. And I knew this week was going to be a busy week for me. The presentation that I had planned to do is a presentation I've done before. So I had the PowerPoint presentation. I went in last week. I made adjustments for this occasion. Got up at 5 this morning, excited to now go through one last time to see the file was nowhere to be found on my system. Searched high and low, no file. And I think what happened is that I accidentally deleted it. I think in the process of selecting things to delete, I accidentally also selected it, deleted it. And several days ago, out of the blue, I can't remember there having been a reason. I was doing some other things and I said to myself, you haven't emptied your bin in a while. So I emptied, so I've been in a state since morning. I spent 4 hours this morning searching every possible place for my presentation. no presentation. It was meant to be a technical one. So it's not something that I could have, reassembled in such a short space of time. So I'd like to begin with an apology. This is, the first in about 14 years that I'm doing, that I'm not delivering on what I had promised, but I'm going back to some suggestions that Jarvis had mentioned when he contacted me first, and that was in relation to my PhD work. Now, both things come out of my PhD, but the presentation you were going to get was a development out of that. I have other concerns too, because that presentation was supposed to be the basis of an article. And having lost the presentation, it means that I will now have to go and redo all of that work. I'm not looking forward to it. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is etymology. Some of you, those of you who are in Ben's class, might have heard the term etymology. You probably didn't know. I have a lot of gray hairs. Some of them popped up since this morning when I was trying to find my presentation. But you don't generally possibly associate etymology with somebody as young and sprightly as myself. Etymology is an old and dusty sort of subdiscipline. Lay people have a problem. Many people can't tell the difference between etymology and entomology. This is if they know entomology at all, and they get them confused all the time. But simply put, etymology is the study of word origins, and that needs some unpacking. When we say word origins, we can think of words in a language that originate elsewhere. And so you're interested there in the ultimate origin of the word. Which language was it taken from? And also, what changes has that word undergone in the language that you are studying? And so these are etymologies for words that come from outside the language that you're looking for. And many people who call themselves etymologists, this is the sort of thing that they are interested in, chasing down words to distant, sometimes dead languages, to see how a language has been influenced over its lifetime. But then there is an aspect of the work which focuses on the derivational history of words. And some people might say, okay, words within the language, we don't need to know where they come from. They come from inside the language. The speakers made them up. But all words have a history. And some of those words might seem pretty straightforward on the surface. But once you start digging, you find a few skeletons in their closets. For the derivational history, what we are dealing with essentially are words created in the language through any of the derivational processes that are available in that language. So say, for example, a word that is formed through compounding two lexemes that already exist in the language, or a word created via a root or a stem and an affix, or a word created through reduplication or zero derivation, stem alternation, a whole barrage of processes. And it is the work of the etymologist to uncover what the history of these words looks like. Now, one thing is important, is very important to note, and that has guided my work, And that is that an etymology, here we're now dealing with the individual word biography, an etymology is a hypothesis about the history of a word. Some etymologies tend to be quite dogmatic. Say X word is from Y. I'm going to say to you that what they really mean is that when we look at all of the available evidence, the best explanation we have is that X comes from Y. So it's really a hypothesis that can be subjected to testing. And I believe that's the best, that's the safest way to approach the origin of words, the etymology of words. So if we think of them in terms of hypotheses, that will guide how exactly we handle our findings, and we will avoid very dogmatic statements on word origin. And here I'm preaching to myself too, because I have made a few dogmatic statements about where a word belongs or where it came from. Now, that guiding principle has been important for me in my work, and my work, starting with my PhD, looked at African words in the Jamaican language. And by the Jamaican language, I'm talking about what linguists refer to as Jamaican Creole. So it's a language born out of contact in the context of plantation slavery coming out of the transatlantic the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans. So starting in the 1600s, sometime about the 1630s thereabout, when the English really entered the trade in enslaved Africans, lots of people were moved from Africa to the Caribbean to work on plantations that were chiefly engaged in cultivating sugarcane for the production of sugar, molasses, and rum. And those items were shipped back to Europe and bolstered European economy. And in so doing, they created what is called the triangular trade of human cargo being shipped from Africa to the Caribbean, rum, sugar, molasses, etc., being shipped from the Caribbean to Europe, and then a host of things, textiles, guns and gunpowder being shipped from Europe to various areas on the African, chiefly West African coast, in order to facilitate the trade. And so this is how Africans ended up in the West Indies, in the Caribbean, unless you believe in the they came before Columbus hypothesis, where there were Africans in the Caribbean before, communicating with the indigenous peoples of the region. By the time the English came in, much of the indigenous population had been decimated. The indigenous population in Jamaica are referred to specifically as the Tainos, and they are an Arawakan people. They left very few influences on Jamaican Creole. They left a few influences on the English language as spoken in Jamaica and elsewhere. And so in Jamaican English and eventually Jamaican Creole, the Arawaks and then their neighbors, the Caribs, left for us words, and also in the Central African area, not Central African, Central American area left words for us like hurricane, hammock, tomato, chocolate through Spanish, um, also the word I wanted to several place names. So Jamaica is itself an Arawakan word. There are debates about it, but I think historians are more or less agreed nowadays that the word Jamaica comes from the name of the people, plus possibly some suffix. So the people are referred to as the Yamaye, and that ka might be some sort of locative marker, um, and it's probably the source of the English word key, um, that's C-A-Y, so little keys, islands, etc. So they left a few words, and by the way, place names. So we have a few place names in Jamaica that come from the indigenous people. Ligony, which is in the region of Jamaica that I'm currently in, that's Kingston and St. Andrew. They left words like mami, which refers to a kind of fruit, but was also given to a place because lots of mami trees grew in that area. Guanaboa is another place name. And so toponyms, names for flora and fauna, and that those made their way into English. Many of them have become global English terms like hurricane and hammock, and some of them also found their way into Jamaican Creole. Now, Jamaican Creole, I did say, the easy version that I tell non-specialists is that Jamaican Creole was formed from the contact between speakers of various dialects of English, mostly non-standard dialects, and also speakers of various West African languages, probably with some Portuguese thrown in. So we have Portuguese words in Jamaican like picnic, which is the word for child, sabi, which I'm not sure anybody uses anymore, for to know. So picnic and sabi. Picnic is for child from Portuguese pequenino, and sabi from Portuguese saber. So the Portuguese are mixed up in there. A few words from Spanish, because the Spanish held the greater part of the region before the English came in to relieve the Spanish of what they had taken from the indigenous peoples. Then well, I had pointed out that for Jamaican, the spiel I give non-specialists is that it was created out of contact between and that kind of says it was created in Jamaica. More and more, with what we are learning, it appears that Jamaican Creole was not created in Jamaica. There are several colonies that were set up before Jamaica. Providence Island was an English colony before it went to the Spanish. Barbados and St. Kitts were colonies before Jamaica. Suriname on the South American mainland was a colony, and it was a colony of England right up to 1660 something, I believe. And the English and the Dutch did an exchange. So up to that point, New Amsterdam, which you now know as New York, was held by the Dutch, and Suriname was held by the English. And through a treaty, they exchanged the territories. And many of the settlers, the English settlers, moved to other territories. Jamaica was one of those territories, and they moved with their slaves. Also, we got people from Barbados, again, with slaves. In fact, the army that took Jamaica from the Spanish, the British Army, was raised in Eastern Caribbean territories, such as Barbados, St. Kitts and Nevis. And we can see evidence of that even today. So this variegated history of the country, we can see in dialects of the language. So the people from Barbados settled in the east of the island, but not far east. And they used da as progressive marker. And that da comes from very likely English does or do. So it's do, which was reduced to da, and to da became da. So there is that linkage. People from Barbados coming with their da for progressive marker, and coming with ben from bin, English bin, as in have been, as a past marker. So we can identify them because they use da as progressive, they use bin as past marker. And then in the late 1660s, I believe, some people moved from Nevis to eastern Jamaica, the eastern tip of the island. And those people are interesting because although they also use da as progressive marker, like the Bajans, they used min as the form of the past marker. So that's M-I-N, min. So whereas the Bajans gave us ben or be, the people from Nevis gave us min. Even today in Eastern Jamaica, that very small section of the island uses min as past marker. So they can't hide. We know where they're from. This is the shibboleth of Jamaican speech. And then the people from Suriname ended up in Western Jamaica. They couldn't hide because they landed in a place which became named Suriname Quarters. That's in Western Jamaica. Western Jamaica has a stark difference from the others, that it uses we instead of ben or min as past marker, and it uses de as progressive marker, which is very similar to the English Creole that is spoken in Suriname. By the way, Suriname is still held by the Dutch, but all of the Creoles spoken in Suriname are English lexicon Creoles. They have Stranan, they have Saramakan, Pamakan, and various offshoots from those. Those are all English lexicon or English lexified Creoles. And so we have those. And so one could recognize different strata in the language based on and different origins of words, even words of English origin, because bin is from English, and I did say da is from English do, but based on the formal structure of the word, we can tell the root of that word to Jamaica, whether it came through Nevis or it came through Barbados or Suriname. So we have that linkage. Now, I went down that route to say to you that there is often debate about whether Jamaican Creole, like other and other Creoles, emerged separately, individually. So they came up ab ovo. Or are we looking at something that was created in one place, like Barbados or Providence or St. Kitts, and then transported, diffused to other areas? More and more, I'm believing the diffusion story. Now, that story is also important. I spoke about different strata of the lexicon. And this is because for all or most of the English lexicon creoles of the Atlantic region, so not just the Caribbean now, but the Atlantic region, for all of them, I guess I should hedge and say most, there is a set of words derived from African languages that show up over and over and over. One of those words is duppy. Duppy is the word that means ghost, and it comes from a language spoken in what is today modern day Ghana. That language is referred to as Akan. Some people call it Tree, although others recognize Tree as one of the dialects of Akan. So Duppy comes from Akan. Now, there were dozens, possibly even hundreds of languages involved in these contact situations on plantations, etc. Why is it that in 14, 20 different places, people would have gone to the same African language for the same word for ghost? So let's say there's some sort of universal requirement for a word for ghost. Let's say ghost is an absolute essential when you are creating a new language. And you have decided that you can borrow that word, although the borrowing is a problematic concept for Creole languages. You can copy, let me use Lars Johansson's term for this. You can copy a word from one of the languages in the community. Why would all of these separate communities go to the Akan language over and over and over for the word for ghost? There's a word for peanuts, pinda, from Kikongo. And by the way, they don't all come from Akan. They come from languages from all over the continent and from all along the West African coast. So there's pinda, which is the word for peanut, and that comes from Kikongo. There is obia. Obia is the word for witchcraft or sorcery, and that is more than likely from Igbo, which is spoken in modern day Nigeria. There is the word nyam, which means eat, and that comes from Wolof, which is spoken in the Senegambia area. So these languages are spoken across a vast region. Why is it that they are recurring in these languages? And so this is why some people believe that what happened is that the pidgin or whatever, the Creole or whatever precursor to the Creole, whether it's a pidgin or whatever you want to call it, was established in one colony, possibly St. Kitts, and then from St. Kitts, it would have moved to Barbados, from Barbados to Suriname, from Suriname to Jamaica, Jamaica to Belize, Jamaica to, we get about as Jamaicans, Jamaica to Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone to Nigeria to Fernando Po, etc., and so on and so forth. So we now have these words showing up in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, Belize, Antigua, Barbuda, all across the Atlantic area. It can't be chance. And so that would be a second layer in these languages. So there's the earlier layer that comes from English. There's this second layer, which would be the early precursor to the English Creoles that got diffused to all the territories throughout the Atlantic area. Those items, and it's a list of about 14 to 20, depending on which researcher you check, but I think 14 are pretty fairly established. That set of terms is referred to as ingredient X. And so ingredient X is a shared set of African-derived terms in the English Creoles of the Atlantic area. Now, in addition to those strata that I've mentioned, we would recognize English words coming in from Barbados. So these would be words that are typical of English lexicon Creoles, no matter where you go. Or we find them in the earliest varieties and also in Jamaica. Some of those words tend to have epenthetic vowels. So you have rata from English rat. At least the maroon varieties in Jamaica, I think also had musu for mouse. So rata for rat, where you get this epenthetic vowel. You get raka in Jamaica, rakas for some people, raka for raka stone, and so on and so in Suriname, in Sranan, you get hagu for hog, and a few other terms. And so you can see a second layer or an additional layer that belongs to English that also predates the founding of the colony in Jamaica. And then now we have the rest of African-derived vocabulary, which was the focus of my research. And for that research, my interest was to look back at the work that was done before and to see if I could do better than my predecessors. I started out very haughty. I mean, of course I can do better than my predecessors. This is 2002, 2003. They worked in 1960s, 1970 odd. I'm clearly better than them. I remember my supervisor having to tone me down. And then by the time I finished my PhD, I was saying in my acknowledgements, look, thanks for having walked this path before. It is a difficult road to trod. You should have seen my desk in that period. I was working at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany. They had a wonderful library. It's a bookworm's dream. Not only that, they believed in supporting research. So no loan terms. You don't get books for 2 weeks and so on. You get books for as long as you need them. When I was leaving the institute, I had to return 400 and odd books to the library. Some of them I had out on loan for more than a year. Now, if somebody else needed it, they could come and borrow it from me, etc. My desk was piled high with books open to different pages because for every word I came across, I had to go and cross-check 30 dictionaries or smaller descriptions of languages, etc. Sometimes I just read through articles on a specific language to see if I'd come across a word. But that also helped me to realize something, is that I also had to be more responsible than my predecessors, whereas many of them just found what they thought was a better etymon, and they gave you the etymon. What I found I had to do, I had to become accountable. So if I'm proposing a new etymology for a word, I had to say, why is it that the existing proposal is not adequate? And so there is an appendix in my thesis where I go through this. Sometimes the discussion for one word would run into several pages because I have to deal with all of the proposals that were made, then all of the possible etyma on the African side, because sometimes they were competing etymologies, in order to determine which one. And then I'd say, based on the evidence, this one appears to be the best source for this. So being accountable to my readers. There was something else that was important in my work too. And that was, I recorded everything that I did, which means that at a later date, I could come back and say that was complete nonsense. Here is a better thing. Or somebody else could come along, understand why I chose a particular etymology and revise that etymology, as opposed to them just being presented with a competing etymology. The work I did involved, it was multidisciplinary. I was in for a rude awakening because when I decided I was going to do this work, I thought, well, Joseph, you've been trained as a linguist. So you need to bring all of your linguistics to bear on this. Yes, grammars of African languages and dictionaries of African languages are not all done in English. I had to consult dictionaries in German, in Dutch, in Swedish, I believe, Portuguese, Spanish, French, and there might have been a couple others. How many of those do I speak? Up to the point of my PhD, I spoke English and Jamaican natively. Well, English I can claim, native as possible. Long story there. Spanish was my first foreign language. I had been doing that since high school. I have a master's in Spanish literature. That was good. I did a year of beginner's Portuguese at university. I could tackle, consulting a dictionary. When I ended up in Germany, German was new. All I knew was Guten Morgen. So to consult dictionaries it took a lot. So it needed somebody who was a polyglot. I was kind of, but I didn't have the sort of spread that the work really required. I had to develop that. And how that came about is that I had to consult a dictionary of Douala, for example, in Danish with a Danish English dictionary. So I'm looking for the African word. It looks like the Jamaican word, but the definition in the dictionary is in Danish. And so I now have to go and consult a Danish English dictionary to see if this means the same thing as the Jamaican word. So had to be a polyglot, or I had to at least feign it. Next, the work required somebody who was not just a linguist, but you also had to be several other things. Historian, folklorist, and linguist. I had to break it up into morphologist, semantician, phonologist, syntactician. So there are some problems in the etymologies that I sorted out by doing syntactic analyses. So there's a Portuguese, there's an Igbo word, so. And in the related language Yoruba, there is a word shosho. Now, so and shosho are not that far apart. Things, the sound, we can account for the sound change, the sound difference. The Jamaican word is so. Is Jamaican so from Yoruba or is it from Igbo? Phonology is not going to help me. They all mean the same thing. syntax was what started it out. By me going to find out what the behavior of shosho is in Yoruba, the behavior of soso in Igbo, and then comparing that to the syntactic behavior of Jamaican soso. And in that way, I discovered that Igbo was the best match, which was nice because the second person plural pronoun in Jamaica, which is the eighth wonder of the world, also comes from Igbo. Languages don't borrow pronouns that easily. And so finding something else, and the weird thing about Igbo is that it gives us this pronoun, and then we don't find a lot of other Igbo words in Jamaican. What's going on here? And so finding this out, but through syntax, was actually a breakthrough for me. And then some other things, it was morphology. There was a Wolof word. The Wolof word nyam, meaning to eat, is in Jamaican. We also have nyam nyam, which means food. Now, that could have been a language internal process. But then I believe Wolof and Fulani, a related language, also does verb reduplication to create nouns. And so as you discover one thing, it's building up the body of evidence to help you to uncover other things. And that was particularly important in the area of phonology. So you had to start out with etymologies that were pretty secure, where this was moving from now hypothesis to the very best explanation for it. You'll be surprised if there's another explanation for this. So like there's the word nyam in Jamaican meaning to eat, also means to taste. So you can say, me nyam the food, I ate the food. But you can also say the food nyam good. The food tastes good. The food nyam good. And it so happens that in Fulani, I believe it is, you do have nyam meaning to taste. The phonology is pretty much the same. The phonology is pretty much the same, but with a few differences. So for the final thing that I will mention, which is on the building up of the evidence, is that you take a word like nyam, which means to eat, and you identify the correspondences between Wolof or Fulani nyam and Jamaican nyam. To say, okay, the nya made it, the a made it, the made it. So we know that Fulani nya corresponds to Jamaican nya. And so when we meet another word with a similar shape, we already have evidence for this kind of trap. But the most important finding in my research, and it should have been pretty obvious, and that was going to be a part of the other presentation I was meant to do, is that when I looked at the African words and the Jamaican words, presumably of African origin, I had gone in with an assumption that where there are differences, Jamaica had changed. But that wasn't the truth in many cases. Jamaica had fossilized the African terms. So very often, if you want to know what 17th century Igbo, Kikongo, Akan looked like, come over to Jamaica, because we have preserved the 17th century pronunciation, whereas on the continent, the languages kept on doing what languages do, which is to change. And so somewhere in the middle of my research, I realized that I had to flip it. So I had to look at Jamaica or the Jamaican form being the starting form and the African form, the current African form that I could find in a dictionary being a later development. So those are just a few of the things I have learned in my research, and I hope that it was useful for you. So questions?
So thank you for the great talk. And yeah, if there is any questions, we have a few minutes for a question.
I do have one or several. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. I'm hearing you.
Good. I'm really quite interested in the point that you made about the borrowing of the pronoun there, because as you said, that sort of functional element is very rarely copied or borrowed among in contact situations. And I appreciate the fact that you can, make a good etymology about its origin based on the sort of factors that you talked about, especially interesting about the related syntactic components. But when you get to the point of establishing that stage of an etymology in a contact situation with so many players involved, is it possible to take a step further and try to investigate why it may have been that Jamaican as a grammar ready to copy a pronoun would have chosen that one as opposed to one from many of the other players in the multifaceted contact situation?
Well, all right. Excellent question. That is the second PhD. So it's hard. It's hard. Why Igbo as opposed to any of the others is not a question that's easy to answer. I haven't found a good reason for it yet. There are some socio-historical reasons that probably might account for it, but then there were other languages in the situation. Why not them? Why the second person singular pronoun, there is an explanation. Because in many English dialects, there isn't a contrast between the second person singular and plural. So it's you. English used to have a very good contrast, at least standard English, in the you, ye, the thou, you sort of contrast. But then later on, that fell out. So that filled a gap in the grammar of English. But why did they go specifically to Igbo? Now, why would you take such a basic lexical item like eat, nyam, from Wolof and not also take the pronoun from them? We do not yet have a very good understanding of the contact situation. And in fact, I'm doing research with a group of persons now to see if we can work out what the proto-society was like. So using ingredient X, what are the items, what are the cultural items in ingredient X? What was this society doing? What, how were they structured? If we can tell that through the lexical items. But we do not yet have a good answer for why. We know, well, at least experience tells us that you need intimate contact in order to borrow something like a pronoun. But were the Igbo in more intimate contact than the Yoruba? That is doubtful. So we're still left with the question of why Igbo. I think we can say, okay, we understand why the second person plural, but why Igbo and not any other language in the situation?
Can I just follow up on that? It's the second person plural, not the second person singular?
Second person plural.
Plural.
So our pronominal system is me. So we have the same distinctions like English. in terms of number. We don't have any duals and so on. So it's me, you, him. We have an invariable, in most dialects, an invariable third person singular. So him is used for all genders. Then we, uno, and them. All of the others are from English, just this one from an African language.
So just a quick little follow-up, is when you were talking about the non-distinction in most varieties of English, I was thinking about the singular in particular. And it makes me think of some of the work that I'm doing on Northern Italian dialects. And what's noted about those is that when they get subject clitics, the second person singular is always among the first to appear in a particular variety. And the second person plural is the ones that are among those that appear last, if at all. So there is that kind of a contrast. And what you're saying then interests me quite a bit at the syntactic or morphosyntactic.
The second person occurs last?
Second person plural occurs absolutely last, but second person singular appears before any other person number combination.
Yeah.
So it's usually second person first, then third person singular, second person singular, then third person singular, then third person plural, and then the others, which are often undifferentiated.
It makes sense. If you or your society is egocentric, then you end up talking about other persons more than you talk about yourself.
But I like what you're saying. I mean, it interests me greatly because it indicates a kind of a reverse situation that I just think is fascinating, and it makes me wonder whether there could also be more than just a featural contrast, something perhaps structural in the way that you implied earlier in your talk about a way to look at why it is the second person plural. I can't make up an analysis right now, but it's intriguing.
And the analysis needs to be done. We haven't looked really at the syntactic behavior of the second person plural, and I mean to do so with along with other stuff. It wasn't until I was teaching in Trinidad that I realized, by the way, they use a reduction of all you as the second person plural, so all you. So I realized that they use all you in a way that I don't think I could do in Jamaican, and they can use it in this sort of vocative way. And I was at the market one day and heard a hawker say, all you, $5 a pound. I said, hold on, I don't think I could use uno in Jamaica like that. So I don't think you could say an Andre, who is here from Jamaica, could bear me out, whether or not we could say uno. But I don't think you could call out in that sort of way. As in, so you could say, I am talking to you, uno me talk, but just uno to start out sounds sort of odd to me. So who knows, there's probably something hiding there that needs to be unearthed. And when we do the comparison with Igbo or other West African languages, something might emerge. And which will lead us to why this one and not others.
Very interesting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes for some other questions, and then we're going to go to the student session. So
if I can ask one question, Joseph, you talked a little bit in your answer to Ed about some other topics that you're working on, but what are other areas in research on the sort of history of Caribbean language varieties that you think are most urgent or most interesting that haven't been done yet?
So we haven't really brought, so outside of APICS, the Atlas of Pidgin and Creole Language Structures, we haven't really brought big data to the study of these languages. And also the comparison of these languages with their lexifier languages, the European languages, or their substrate languages, the African languages. And this is a project that I'm crafting at the moment, which might take a while, but also not to do the sort of helter-skelter comparison that is normally done. Like you have one feature, the copula, then you have syllable structure, then pronominal form, and so you have 150 features, and they come from 30 different areas of grammar. My plan is to take one aspect of the grammar, and that would be the noun phrase. Create a feature catalog for that, and also partner with experts on African languages and hopefully experts on English to fill in that feature catalog. And out of that, we can see what is how similar, we can tell how similar is Jamaican to Akan in terms of the noun phrase. And so I think that sort of detailed, fine-grained research, but also incorporating the statistical stuff. So now not just eyeballing the data, not just doing the linguistic analysis and say, hey, they look like they fit, but is it statistically significant? And so we'd have a statistician on the team that could plug all the data into whatever software and generate a set of things, including phylogenetic trees. So we can see, okay, Akan has been claimed as the substrate language of Jamaican. How close is Jamaican to Akan in terms of the noun phrase? So there's that sort of work that needs to be done. Creole languages are not well described. So there is still need for solid descriptions of Creole. There is so much left to do, which is why I am uneasy when people make very grand claims about Creole languages, knowing that we haven't, for Jamaican, which is one of the better described English lexicon Creoles, I'm still learning things every day. So I'm putting together a book on the noun phrase, which is the precursor to that work I spoke about. And I am fascinated every time I return to it, and I'm discovering something new. And so just basic descriptions would be welcome. Semantics and lexical semantics, very little work has been done there in that. And I know you have done some work in that area. Word formation and morphology, practically nothing. And that's something I'm also working on.
Thank you. Yeah.
So if there are no other questions, then let us thank the speaker for the wonderful talk.
Just a second, may I ask a question, please?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so let me first apologize for not turning on my camera. I'm joining all the way from Hong Kong, and it is still very early morning here, and I promise you don't want to see my early morning face. Okay, thank you very much for a good presentation, Joseph. I wanted to ask about the section related to the emergence of Jamaican Creole. You said that for you, you're now beginning to believe the story that says it was developed somewhere and brought here, which of course is not the popular narrative. No, you know, Probably for egocentric reasons, we like to believe that it was developed here. What is the reason that accounts for that shift that is taking place in your mind now?
Well, I follow the data. So I follow the evidence where it leads. And the evidence is saying, because what you would have to consider, based on what I outlined, the chances that in 14 to 20 different territories, different groups of people, although speaking many of the same languages, would happen upon the same word for ghost, it is not very likely. And I mean, and they're all deciding on the same word for ghost from Akan, the same word for peanut from Kikongo, the same word for sorcery, medicine, etc. from Igbo. That's not very likely. So the chances, the probability is low. And then in addition to the probability, the statistics, we do have historical evidence of communication and migration between these territories. And so I'd say that those who believe that the language was created in one territory and diffused, they are absolutely on the right track. Did that answer your question?
Yes, I'm wondering though if you wouldn't need more evidence than the words that you mentioned to sort of substantiate that claim.
Well, there are other words. So at the beginning of the presentation, I had mentioned some words of English origin that are used, that have functional use in the language. So bin or ben, de or da for aspect marking. That these show up over and over. And then there's a whole complex of words. Let's take da. And the work of Hubert Devenish and Norval Smith has shown this. If we take da, da turns up in a variety of functions in these languages as progressive marker, as focus marker, as locative marker, etc., etc. And then you get a da-de distinction, that you get da, I think, in all uses, but you only get de in some. So de, I believe, never occurs as the focus marker. You only get da. And you can practically split the Caribbean into two varieties based on the distribution of da and de. Yeah? And for them to all be behaving in this sort of way suggests that there is some sort of historical link between them.
Okay.
That's not chance.
Right, and that's all that would right. That would come before. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So at this point, we'd like to thank our speaker for the presentation, and also invite the students to stay for a little bit longer just to chat. So the session afterwards is only open to students, but both undergraduate and graduate alike.